Connecticut.
And why did you join?
When I started, well, I'll try again. When I was about 10 years old, I had been carrying a paper route since I was about age 7. And the drugstore down in the center of town was one of my stops along my route. And so I noticed a lot of what we call paperbacks, little inexpensive books on the rack. And so as I looked through those, there were a lot on military history. And so I bought some of those and became interested in military history and decided, yeah, I think that's something I'd like to do for a living.
And why did you pick the branch of service certificate?
Because I'm afraid of the water. I'll jump out of airplanes and things like that, but don't get me out on the ocean.
Do you recall your first days in service?
You know, I really don't. I remember that it was an officer basic training down at Fort Gordon, Georgia, and the only thing I remember about it, it was hot and humid.
Anything more about boot camp, training, experiences?
Yep. I have an image in my mind that will live with me forever, I guess. That in our class of officer inductees, I guess you would call them, brand new second lieutenants, green as grass, maybe even greener. We had ROTC Lieutenant Larry Pollock from Brooklyn, and Larry had never been out of Brooklyn. Well, as part of our training, we were out on a mission in the Georgia woods in the wilderness, and so Larry was the point man, and the rest of us were following. And all of a sudden, a rattlesnake just started to slither across the path several feet in front of Larry, and Larry, never having been out of the city, started bam, 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 started firing. Well, they were only blanks that we had in our rifles, but it was so funny to see Larry getting so scared that he's firing blanks at the snake, and the rest of us behind are roaring with laughter. And of course, the entire mission was compromised because, no more stealth or secrecy after all of this. But that was hilarious. I think I'll always remember that. I wonder how Larry's doing.
Do you remember your instructors?
I really don't. I can't. There was one first lieutenant who was one of the instructors who was a burly black officer, and his first name was Edward. I can't remember the rest of his name, but he had some kind of a sense of humor. Now, we had another officer in our group from University of Hawaii by the name of Jack Katahira. And this officer greeted us in the morning. Good morning, gentlemen. And you too, Katahira. It was a joke, he wasn't really being critical. But little things like that. What else can I remember? I better not say this one. Yeah, I'm going to anyway. You can delete this if you need to. Okay. So one night that we were sitting around in the barracks watching TV and just smoking and joking, as we say, just shooting the breeze. And we had another officer in our group by the name of, what was his name? Barton from Philadelphia. Dave Barton from Philadelphia. Yeah, and Dave all of a sudden had gas. And I mean, he was just ripping them one after the other. And somebody started calling him Fartin' Barton, and he was forever thereafter known by that. I bet you weren't expecting that, were you? Well, that's where the saying comes from. You got to watch out for that crazy Rick. You never know what he's going to say next.
I know boot camp was probably tough. How did you get through that? How did you get through the strenuousness of it?
Only with the greatest difficulty, because I was far from what you would call a great physical specimen. The running was especially tough for me. I remember that we also had another officer in our group, a lieutenant who had graduated from University of Illinois, the Fighting Illini, and his name was Gil Singer, who had run track and cross country and those types of things for Illinois. And Gil was just striding far out ahead of everybody else without even breaking a sweat, while the rest of us were just having a terrible time in the heat and humidity.
Okay, after boot camp, where did you go?
Well, various training things. I remember being in Fort Lee, Virginia. I remember being at Fort Benning, Georgia for the airborne school, and I've become a paratrooper. I suppose that there may have been others. That's over 40, that's almost 40, no, it's almost 50 years ago. I can't even remember what I had for breakfast this morning. But I ended up at Fort Hood, Texas, and tried desperately to get over to Vietnam. But since I was 4F, that I kept getting deferred for this reason and that reason. Finally, during the big build-up, then they needed whoever they could get, and so finally they conceded and said, "Oh, all right, I guess we have to take you." And I'm thinking, okay, it's about time. After all, this is my career, you know.
Okay, before we get to Vietnam, were there any outstanding experiences at any of the other training places, Fort Lee, Benning?
Oh yeah. I had an incident at Fort Benning in airborne school, paratroop school, that actually was beneficial to me later. Now, the first week is what we call ground week, when you do all of the running and calisthenics and just a lot of physical stuff. And you also begin jumping off of platforms of various heights, and learn how to land with your feet and knees together and go into what we call a PLF, which is short for a parachute landing fall. And so then the second week is Tower Week, when first they bring us up into the 34-foot tower and get all rigged up in the jump harness and jump out, learn how to stand in the door, jump out the door properly, as though simulating a jump from an aircraft in flight. Except that when you get down to the bottom, when all the shroud lines and risers deploy, instead of a parachute canopy opening up, then it just ends up in a big pulley on a cable going down at an angle to a berm, an embankment at the distance, and then you just go gliding right on down, and you come on back, and you do it time after time after time. I think several thousand times, well, maybe not that many, until you finally get it right. And believe me, that this is a dangerous sport, and so they want to make sure that you get it right before you proceed on to the next phase. So after graduating from the 34-foot tower, then we go to the 250-foot tower. And that is like a big, tall radio tower that you may see with cross arms, and the idea being that you'll be attached to a cable coming down from one of the cross arms, depending on the wind direction. And so the idea being for the wind to blow you away from the tower instead of into the tower. So any of the four arms could be selected. On this particular day on the 250-foot tower, we had an old airborne soldier, a sergeant first class, and he's bellowing at us through the bullhorn, battery-powered bullhorn. And so, my turn. Get in the middle of a big, I call it a halo. It's a big steel ring about the diameter of a deployed parachute. And then I forgot exactly how it's rigged up, but then here you go. You're hoisted up, parachute, halo, everything, up to 244-foot level, almost to the 250-foot level. And here you are, just literally just hanging below this entire apparatus. And so the sergeant says, "All right, are you ready?" They can have a gruff voice like that. I think it's for effect. But then you say you're ready, okay, and so then the winch brings you up the additional 6 feet to the 250-foot level, where an automatic release drops you right out from the middle of this huge steel halo. And now you're coming down in your first free fall. And the sergeant is still bellowing his instructions through his battery-powered bullhorn. Now, an area for quite a distance is roto-tilled up, so that when you're first coming in for the first time from a descent from altitude, that you'll hit on something relatively soft. Okay, no problem. Did that the first few times, and on this particular time, then I remember I got hauled up there. And, "Are you ready?" "Ready, Sergeant." And so I'm cut loose, and here I come down. Now, to steer a parachute, you do what we call pulling a slip. If I want to steer to my left, then I'll take the front left and the front rear risers of the parachute and pull them down to my chest, which tilts the canopy this way, meaning that air spills off the upper edge of the canopy, and you glide down and to your left. And same thing to pull a front slip, same thing. Any direction that you would do the same way. Well, I don't remember which direction my slip was on this particular day. Let's assume it was a left slip. Pull a left slip! And here I'm coming down with the wind, with the slip, which is accelerating my descent in that direction. "You're doing great! Hold that slip! Hold that slip!" And I see this ground approaching at about 2,000 miles per hour. And I'm thinking, when is this crazy sergeant going to tell me let up, which is the term for not slipping anymore. He never did. He made me hold that slip all the way into the ground, by which time I was completely off of the roto-tilled area and on ground that was packed as hard as cement. This also happened to be the last jump, the equipment jump, and you got this huge pack and this rifle case strapped on your leg. And I'm thinking, I am going to get killed. And do you know that I did the best PLF, parachute landing fall, I ever did? Just hit, rolled, came right back, and the sergeant's going crazy with adulation and praise and commendations. And nobody's more amazed than I am, you understand? Well, that's just a segue, Brianna, for this. Subsequently, a little later on in my career, I made a jump that I had a malfunction in the parachute. And after having exited the aircraft, the parachute deploys. I look up and there's a big hole in the top of the parachute. Well, my first response is to panic. This does not look like it's going to be a good day. But then, okay, let's be sane about this. What was I taught? Okay, inspect. Okay, yeah, okay, no other damage. Next thing you do is just look around and see how's your rate of descent relative to the other jumpers in the area. I'm coming down a little faster than the other guys, but you know what? I'm not going to put out the reserve parachute. Now, you got the reserve parachute on your front, and if you have there are numbers of malfunctions that you could have, and a blown canopy is one of them. I said, okay, this has all happened instantaneously. This is not taking several minutes to think over, I promise you. Now, if I deploy that reserve parachute, then there's every chance that it might get tangled up in the main parachute, and so now they're interfering with each other, and now I really don't have any air supporting me up there. That could be a very serious problem. Might even ruin my day. All right, so I'm just going to ride this one out, and I came in just perfectly. Did a PLF right back up on my feet, ran and collapsed the parachute. And why did I tie this together for you? Because of the fact that if I had not had that experience at jump school during Tower Week with that sergeant, whom I thought was a Looney Tune, bringing me in with the wind, with the slip, I thought he was going to try to drive me into the ground 6 feet. If I hadn't had that experience, I would not have had the confidence to come in on that subsequent jump sometime later, and might have caused some really disastrous consequences. But that's what I used to do, so I look back on it now and in jest I say, yep, that's what I used to do, jump out of airplanes and kill people for a living. Well, why are you laughing? Better that I kill them than they kill me, don't you think? Yeah.
And that experience was at which fort?
Oh, that was at Fort Benning, Georgia. That was at Airborne School.
How about after that? Fort Hood?
Oh, yeah. And Fort Hood, I was down there, and yeah, not in a. Please don't interrupt them. I was there. Went from there to Korea. Came back to what did I come back to? Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, where I first went through the officer advanced course, and then was actually teaching, instructing in that. And then, as I think I mentioned moments ago, that the Army had a big buildup going on, and so they finally had to take me, whether they wanted or not. They said, okay, you get to go. So I went out of Fort Carson, Colorado, with the 5th Mechanized Infantry Division, and that unit was up on and in the DMZ along the Ben Hai River between North and South Vietnam. In other words, as far north as you can go in South Vietnam. And then ultimately I had an opportunity to become a company commander in the famous 101st Airborne Division, which for anybody with career aspirations, that's something that you just do not turn down. And so I said, yeah, man, count me in. It was during that particular assignment that I got injured.
get there. Do you remember arriving in Vietnam and what that was like?
Yeah, the first time in Vietnam that, first I'll tell you a little bit about the flight. I was on what they call the advance party, flying over from an air base near Fort Carson, Colorado, which is near Colorado Springs. And the entire interior of a C-141 jet cargo aircraft was gutted, so that we had a big army truck and a couple of jeeps, and I forgot what else, maybe a towed artillery piece or something, all in this giant airplane. But this, what I'm trying to tell you is we did not go first class. There weren't any stewardesses and nice, comfortable, cushy seats and movies and those types of things. We were really roughing it, even in the airplane. And I think we first went by way of Alaska, stopped in Alaska, refueled in order to take the polar route over the North Pole to, I think it was Tachikawa Air Base in Japan. And then we refueled again there and took off again and came down in or near Da Nang, Vietnam, but in the northern part of South Vietnam is what I'm trying to say. It was a long flight and an uncomfortable flight. And so I remember what we did. There was no place to sit, no place to lie down, so we did what good GIs do. They improvise. And what we did, just lie right down across the seat of the truck. What else could you do? I also remember when we came down into Vietnam, and I totally expected that I was going to be greeted by rockets and mortars and hostile enemy fire, and I could just imagine, you know, having seen war movies and read my military history, that I could just imagine getting attacked just as we were getting off of the airplane, and that I was going to buy the farm right then and there. But not so. It was a secure air base. It wasn't until after that we disembarked from the aircraft and unloaded the trucks and various things that we brought over on the aircraft with us, that I heard some firing, I suppose small arms and artillery out in the distance, but nowhere near. But that doesn't mean that I was scared, because I understand that somebody can sneak up on you when you're not expecting it.
Then what did you do once you got to Vietnam?
You know, I don't even remember. Basically just tried to keep alive.
Do you remember your general mission? Or
I don't. Just I'm not trying to be cutesy with this. The whole thing was that there was somebody out there whose mission was to kill me, and my mission was to kill him. And so I've always told my men, you know, listen, if it ever comes down to a situation, a scenario, when it comes down being your life or the other guy's life, do everything you can to make sure it's the other guy's life.
focused on defense?
Again, please?
This defense is taking care of yourself.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. You know, I'm not somebody who's naturally nasty and bloodthirsty, that I just, you know, feel like going out and killing people because, you know, for the sport of it. But when you choose something like the military service as a career, then you understand that that's a part of it.
And did you see combat?
Oh yeah, felt combat, but not that time. Yeah.
Were there casualties in your unit?
You know, there were, but I don't think there were very many. The only one that I remember offhand, a friend of mine was an infantry company commander. And don't forget, now this is 5th Mechanized Infantry Division, that a lot of our activity took place in track-laying vehicles. In other words, not only tanks, but self-propelled howitzers, armored personnel carriers, all kinds of various tracked vehicles, so that you could maneuver very fast around a battlefield, or to redeploy from one area to another very quickly without having to walk there. So this friend of mine was in his command post carrier when a Viet Cong spider-holed that vehicle. And that might not be a familiar term, so I'll try to explain. Now, the Viet Cong were the world's greatest experts in camouflage, cover, and concealment, and spider holing, that they'd be in a hole in the ground covered over with thatch and vegetation, so it looked just like natural ground until we'd get by, after which the Viet Cong stand back up out of his spider hole, aim his weapon at the rear of the vehicle, or if the troops were on foot, at their backs. And so this particular Viet Cong fired what we call an RPG-7, a rocket-propelled grenade, which is an armor-piercing projectile through the back of the command post carrier. And do you know that it's about that big? You know, it's got like a small artillery piece. It passes right between Ed's arm and side, takes a chunk out of his arm, takes a chunk out of his side, and doesn't kill him. It wounds him. But can you imagine if that was just a couple inches one direction, he loses an arm, a couple inches another direction, he loses his life? That impressed me, because that's about as close a call as I can imagine somebody having, particularly with a projectile that size.
Do you have any memorable experiences from Vietnam?
I do. Lots of them. As you thank you. As you've probably heard, that it was a very difficult war to fight because of the fact that you never really knew who your enemy was. The Viet Cong dressed just like common Vietnamese peasants during the day. In fact, I remember hearing an interview of General, or should I say President Eisenhower at one time, in which Ike was asked, who do you think has the tougher job, you and your troops over in Europe in World War II, or Bill Westmoreland and his troops here in Vietnam? And Ike says, oh, Westmoreland by far. And which I suppose was a surprising answer to the interviewer, because why do you say that? And he says, at least I knew who my enemy was and which direction he was. And that just supplements what I said a moment ago. I use that also as a springboard. Here's an illustration that Vietnam, of course, is marked with rice paddies. Virtually the entire terrain is rice paddies. Well, in between the rice paddies are the dikes, and can you visualize like a dirt or gravel roadway running over the top of the dike separating the rice paddies? And so I'd be out with my driver in the Jeep driving over one of these rice paddies during the day, and two things occurred. Either you'd see some Vietnamese in the traditional garb just working their rice paddies and looking up like that, and my thought would be, I'll bet you it's one of my enemies that once he gets done tilling his rice paddy today, he's going to be out trying to kill my butt tonight. The other thing that I remember, even little kids, and as we'd pass by, they'd pick up rocks and throw at the Jeep. And I think to myself, boy, even this little kid is warming up his pitching arm for throwing grenades at us tonight. So I say to you, yeah, I was supposed to be the big, brave company commander. 124 really good troops whose lives I was responsible for, as well as mission accomplishment. And I faked it well, because I had to, just to set an example for the guys as to, their brave commander. Ha ha. Not me. Anybody who tells you that they weren't afraid is either lying to you or they were hopped up on something. Because it's a scary thing, particularly when you don't know who your enemy is. And the other thing being, and here we go, one of Rick's crazy jokes again. Why do you think I carried an extra roll of toilet paper with me at all times?
Any other Vietnam experiences?
Yeah. Thinking about what I just mentioned to you, Brianna, you heard, I'm sure, of the My Lai massacre, in which a Lieutenant William Calley was basically court-martialed for what was known as the My Lai massacre in a town or a hamlet called My Lai in central Vietnam, and in which there were some Viet Cong known to be in that particular hamlet, and there was absolutely no success in Bill or his associates being to figure out, okay, who's the friendlies and who's the enemies. And so they torched the whole village, and a lot of people died. And so I did not know Bill Calley, but I did know his company commander, Captain Ernie Medina, who was a very fine soldier. I did not know their colonel, but I did know their general, the Major General Sam Coster, who was the commanding general of the Americal Division, the 23rd U.S. Infantry Division. I knew Sam Coster when he was a brigadier, a one-star general in Korea, when I was stationed in Korea earlier. What a fine officer. Well, I gotta tell you that Calley and Medina and Coster all paid the penalty for all of the U.S. forces in Vietnam, because I'm here to tell you that that was not an isolated incident. Somebody just had an axe to grind. I don't know, might have been Teddy Kennedy. He was always harsh and big on words, even though that he never saw the first day of combat himself. I can't tell you that it was him, but that's just his style. Can I tell you about Teddy Kennedy? Here we go again. Got a million of them. Gee, I hope you got a long tape in that thing. Okay, Teddy Kennedy was a young senator in the U.S. Senate at the time. This is in the late 60s. and I was with the 101st Airborne Division. Now our division commander at that time was a Major General Melvin Zais, Z-A-I-S. And Mel Zais was just a wonderful officer. I mean, he cared for his troops, and his troops loved him. Do you know that Mel Zais was from, can you guess, Fall River, Massachusetts, Kennedy territory? Well, you've probably also heard about the Hamburger Hill incident. A lot of our troops got injured and some killed trying to take a particular hill. Now, Hamburger Hill, the actual name was, in Vietnamese, is Dong Ap Bia, which is Black Virgin Mountain. And the reason for needing to get this terrain was because it was the predominant terrain in the area. Whoever owns this small mountain or large hill has excellent observation for miles around and excellent fields of fire. And so, that being the case, that whoever owns this hill has an advantage. And so the 1st of the 501st Parachute Infantry under Lieutenant Colonel Weldon Honeycutt attempted to take this hill, got pushed back with rather severe casualties, some more softening up with artillery strikes and bomber strikes. And another attempt resulted in the same. Finally, on the 3rd attempt, the hill was taken. Well, don't you know that Teddy Kennedy, back in his air-conditioned office in Washington, D.C., hears about this, and he says, "Rah, rah, rah, what are you doing?" I mean, you know, like that he was a 4 or 5-star general of some repute. So Mel Zais basically said, "I'm not going to take that from Kennedy or anybody else. I don't care if he is a..." Now that could be a career jeopardizing thing to do, particularly when you write an article and have it published in the Pacific Stars and Stripes, the GI newspaper, basically blasting Teddy Kennedy and asking him, you know, what does he know? He's never been within 10,000 miles of the place, never seen a day of military service in his life, much less know the tactical and strategic situation of the moment. So of course, we all cheered Mel Zais, the whole division, 10,000 guys. I can't tell you it was an audible cheer, but in our hearts we definitely did. That's our general. But we thought, gee, I hope it doesn't cost him his career. Well, fortunately, that cooler heads prevailed in Washington, D.C., because not long thereafter, General Zais was promoted to Lieutenant General, 3-star general, in the same Corps area, which never happens. Usually when you get a promotion, you're transferred elsewhere. Here he is, right in the same. And so, yeah, there's more. General Zais, before he finally retired, made 4-star general and became the Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel of the U.S. Army. Guess who had the last laugh?
So, do you have can you tell me a kind of chronological order of where you went in Vietnam?
I was only ever in 2 places, to tell you the truth, Brianna. And wouldn't you know, I have no idea what it's like down in what they call the Mekong Delta, down in the southern portion of Vietnam. Never been there. All of my activity was up in the absolute north of South Vietnam. As I said, with the 5th Mechanized Infantry Division, absolutely up on and in the DMZ along the Ben Hai River between North and South Vietnam in the area formerly occupied by the Marines. And then subsequently the 101st Airborne's area was the next area immediately south of that. And so all I know is pretty wide open terrain, with the exception of some jungle out to the west near Laos that I don't have a whole lot of experience in marshes and triple canopy jungle and that type of thing.
So what is that terrain like? What did you take away from that as far as what that's like?
Well, I wouldn't want to live there. No, it's a wonderful plant. It's a wonderful type of an environment for rubber plantations, in which Vietnam was the home of the Michelin. You heard of Michelin tires? Yeah, Michelin rubber plantations were there. I suppose they must have got busted up during the course of the war, though. But yeah, this very warm climate, high humidity, and so on, which proliferates jungle and vegetation, I guess, is ideal for that type of product.
Now, you said you were injured. Was that Vietnam or Korea?
Vietnam.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, it was one of those things where I had my head up when it should have been down. And of all the crazy things, it was not even out in a combat environment, it was in base camp. And so this particular evening, the base camp came under attack, and I don't have any idea whether it was a mortar or a rocket or what it was, but I got slashed in the leg with a shard.
How serious was that?
I guess it was serious enough, but as you see, I still have all my legs and arms and things, so unlike a lot of people who either lost limbs or eyes or even their life. I'll tell you if you wish about my experience down at the Vietnam Wall in DC, but I'll wait for you to direct that.
Okay. Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Yeah, I forget. There were several, but and then subsequently people would ask, oh, what's that for? What's that for? What's that for? What's that for? And I'd say, I'll make it easy for you. They're all for being in the right place at the right time, with the exception of the Purple Heart, and that's for being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Now, were you doing things like battle planning, that type of stuff?
At one time or another, I guess I did a little bit of everything.
Do you remember details of that or what that's like?
I really don't. Please, I'm not trying to be evasive, just that memory fails after a great many years.
You know, it's funny. Every interview is different. Some people have little or nothing to say about this question, and another veteran has so much to say about that question. It's just, it's whatever you say.
Well, it's a crazy thing that my memory seems to be instantaneous on some things and completely blank on others.
Yeah. Okay. How did you stay in touch with your family?
Very poorly. That they were pretty good about writing to me periodically, But since I was busy shooting people, getting shot at, and trying to keep control over 124 other men at the same time, that I had my hands full. I did not. I was not a very good letter writer. I'm sure there must have been times when they didn't get some form of communication, when they must have thought, gee, I wonder if my kid got killed or something.
What was the food like?
We were blessed to have some really good food. And now I'll grant you that there were times when, considering whatever the situation of the moment was, that we might have been eating food with helicopter dust blown all over it. But I promise you that when you're hungry, it was good. And likewise, that our mess sergeant was a sergeant first class Bob Peters from Alabama. And Bob and his men did a really fabulous job.
Did you have enough supplies?
Absolutely.
You said earlier that you did feel stress, you did feel fear. How do you deal with that?
I never have. In fact, I'm subject to what they call PTSD. Have you heard of that? Post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's stayed with me all of this time, and I'm still treated for it over at the VA hospital, and it just does not go away.
Do you feel that the support from the VA is enough? Do you feel like they feel adequately?
I think the VA is a wonderful organization, and they take excellent care of the returning troops. I think that the government, and specifically the Congress, should do more of that type of thing, specifically in terms of funding, but they cannot do everything. And there are any more than if somebody, let's say, lost a leg, that I guess there's ways that a leg can be spliced back on. The likelihood of that being done is pretty slim. And likewise, I think that in a psychological type of injury, that I'm sure they do all they can, and I'm sure that they're the things that they know and the things that they do are all state of the art, but there's just certain limitations.
Was there something special that you did for good luck?
I've never been a superstitious person, and so I can't remember any rabbit's feet or lucky coins or any of those types of things. I'm going to say no.
Did you see any of that around you? Any of the people that you oversaw doing anything like that?
You know, I don't remember having seen any of that, and whether it's because people might have been too embarrassed to share it, I don't know.
How did people entertain themselves?
Well, of course, you know, that would have mainly been in base camp. Do you know what I mean when I say base camp? The Vietnam War was largely fought kind of like the wars were fought back in medieval times, where everybody is in the castle inside the moat at night. You pull up the drawbridge, then come dawn, you put the drawbridge back down, everybody goes out and fights. That was not too bad an illustration of what it was like. Or like out in the Wild West, that the cowboys and the Indians, or the cavalry and the Indians, that where you're inside the stockade at night and then you go out and fight the Indians during the day. That's how it was. Very similar to that fight. What was I going with this?
Entertainment.
Oh, okay. So, understanding with that illustration of what the base camp was like, that yeah, most of the entertainment would have been in base camp. Now, that yeah, the guys get together, have their little pick up baseball or softball games, something like that. I remember that in our company that my first sergeant and I got a few guys and we constructed an amphitheater on a hillside so that you know, have sort of like a semicircular place that we'd put up some logs and then step it up another, so it was just up in steps up a hillside. And so somebody scrounged up a lot of scrap plywood and painted them all white, and so we actually had a movie screen that we could get movies and project them right in the base camp, and that was pretty popular. We were really creative with things like that.
Well, you gotta be, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's going to come over and build an IMAX over in a combat zone.
Were there entertainers? Did anyone come out?
You know what? The answer is yes, but if you get a famous entertainer come over, mainly with the USO shows, that they would not, you know, do a tour like you might jump in the tour bus and do Atlanta tonight and Washington D.C. tomorrow night and New York City the following. No, they'd come and put in at one particular place, usually a secure area, and then each unit was given a certain number of allocations. So for example, if the venue could only accommodate 2,000 troops, then perhaps the 101st Airborne Division might be allocated 200 of those, and then the division staff would allocate 50 to each of the brigades, and the brigade staff would allocate right on down the chain. So when you get right down to it, maybe only one or two of your guys could go, and I'm sure everybody would have liked to, but the way I dealt with that was to choose according to a reward for how somebody's been doing his job, and particularly how his attitude had been lately. So a reward thing. I guess there must have been other units must have had some form of a lottery, but not ours. I always was very careful to make sure that every reward or award that was earned was gotten by that soldier. It was really, really good for morale. On the other hand, you want to know something. If somebody had a slap on the hand coming, he got that too. So the guys knew that the old man's going to be fair. The old man is a term that we use for the commanding officer. I mean, when I was a 21-year-old lieutenant and referred to as the old man by people that have been in the Army for 30 years, I never did get used to that.
Did you ever attend?
Never did. Never did.
Did you ever get any leave?
Mm-hmm.
And where did you go for that?
Hawaii.
How was that?
Want another story?
Yeah.
I got one anyway. Well, we went to Hawaii on what they call R&R. And don't you know, I did not realize that I was going at the time that the Chinese New Year would have been. So here we are in our hotel right down there in Honolulu, and all of a sudden, I don't know, I'm sleeping. It must have been, could have been midnight, could have been 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning, I don't know. But all of a sudden, bam, 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 bam. I thought we were under attack, and so I roll out of bed, bam, hit the floor. You know, it's the first thing you do, get flat on the deck, so as to minimize the possibility of being injured. And then suddenly, where am I? And then I remembered where I was. Well, what's all? And then suddenly it dawned on me. I'm in Honolulu. There's a lot of Oriental descent people, Japanese, Chinese, and so on in Hawaii. This is Chinese New Year. It's fireworks.
So how long was your R&R?
A week at a time. Yeah. Everybody got one, but of course it had to be staggered so that an entire unit wouldn't be gone at the same time.
So what did you do while you were there?
Probably just soaked up some rays and felt good that I wasn't getting shot at. Please don't interrupt. I think maybe better with me.
Do you recall, and this is in general over the course of all of your time in Vietnam, do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events? I'm not asking.
Oh yeah. Here's a good one. Remember a moment ago I described to you our amphitheater in the base camp. Well, now I had a soldier, I think he was a Specialist 4 or Specialist 5 from Indiana by the name of Carl Helton, who was a combat photographer. And Carl was attached to another unit who was out in a combat situation while our unit was still in base camp. And so my first sergeant, Ernie West, and I were sitting there in the amphitheater watching a movie one night when, what do you think happens? Up walks Carl and says, "Hey, Cap, hey, Top." Top is a nickname for a first sergeant, top sergeant, you know. "Hey, Cap, hi, Top, what's happening?" I said, "Carl, when did you get back?" I said, "I just got in a few minutes ago." I said, how'd the operation go?" "Ah, good." I said, "Anything noteworthy?" He said, "I got zinged in the shoulder." I said, "You what?" I said, "Yeah, I got nicked in the shoulder." I said, "Show me." And he showed me a place where just a little fragment, essentially just zinged him right in the shoulder. And, you know, it wasn't much bigger than what you or I would call a sliver. And I said, so did you need first aid for it? He said, "No." He said, I just pulled it out with my fingers and it bled a little, but that was it. And I said, "Well, did the commander of that outfit put you in for a Purple Heart?" "No." I said, "Well, don't you think he should have?" I said, "No, how would I ever justify a Purple Heart for a little injury like that? You know, people ask, so you're with a Purple Heart, they think that you got blown in half or lost an eye or lost a leg or something." I said, "Hold it. Hey, Carl, let me ask you this. If that particular fragment had been up and to the right approximately 10 inches and taken out your eye, would you think that you might be entitled to a Purple Heart?" "Yeah, but," I said, "Carl, there's no yeah, but." I said, "Neither you nor I had any choice as to where that fragment struck. And so The fact that you got struck is all I'm concerned about. Since the other commander didn't put you in for a Purple Heart, I'm going to. But sir, but sir, but sir. No, but sir. If you don't want to receive the Purple Heart, you tell the colonel that when he goes to pin it on. Incidentally, he did receive the Purple Heart.
Did any of you pull any pranks on each other?
Oh boy, that's a great question. Let me think on that one. Boy, this isn't a prank, but I remember something that happened that was far from a prank. Okay. Now, as a company commander, I was blessed to have some really great sergeants. And anything our unit ever did that was noteworthy wasn't because of anything Rick Morgan thought up or did. It's because of what his sergeants thought up. And so we had a really great team effort going on. And so my sergeants took real good care of me. Now, I had a young sergeant from Oklahoma, Sergeant First Class, E7, by the name of Mel Banks. And Mel Banks was a great young NCO. But he was cocky. Oh, Mel Banks was really, he was the paratrooper and he strutted about like a bandit. He was really good at what he did, but he was cocky. I had another sergeant, big fella, Floyd Matson from Texas, must have been 6'2" and 240, big guy. Always called him Matt. So it was my SOP, standing operating procedure, that you do not speed around in the unit area. Much too dangerous. You go at a slow rate of speed through the unit area. Well, Mel Banks is driving through the unit area at what Sergeant Matson thought was an excessive rate of speed, and Matt flags Banks down and starts to chew him out about it. And I'm over here, but I'm not going out there to intercede. I just want to see what happens. And so Matt is dressing Banks down, which is a term for chewing him out. And Banks, being this chippy type of a person, real cocky, basically is firing back at Matt. And so they were getting into it, and I just didn't know what was going to happen. When all of a sudden, that I see Banks go like this, and I didn't know if he was just gesticulating to make, an emphasis, or whether he was trying to strike Matson or not. But Matt took it as striking him, and Big Matt, BAM! Hauled off and hit Banks square. Well, I could tell that Banks wasn't going to have any more of that. He let the clutch out in that Jeep and he was out of there. By the way, I don't remember ever seeing him speeding through the unit area again.
You've already given me an inkling of this. What did you think of your officers and fellow soldiers?
We had a mutual respect. As a company commander, if I didn't have 124 really good guys all pulling together in the same direction, then I'm useless. And so, let's see, there's two things that I might like to share. First of which is, yeah, there's certain individual awards and decorations that you get for what you personally did. But there's another group of awards and decorations called unit awards and decorations, which are awarded to a particular unit for something real good that a unit did. Our unit, was it 5 or 6? I think 5. Our unit, our company, earned 5 unit awards and decorations. And those meant so much more to me than anything that any of my individual ones did, because that told me that we had everybody pulling in the same direction, and that we had everybody fighting together and as a team. So anything we did as a team of 125 guys, me and 124 others, meant a whole lot more to me than anything I ever did personally. That told me maybe I was doing something right as a commander. But as a commander, I told you moments ago, I don't know if I did anything right, wrong, or in between. But I know I had a whole lot of good sergeants who had been around for many years that were helping me.
Did you keep a journal at all?
No.
Do you recall the day your service ended?
I'm sorry, I really don't.
How about what you did in the days and weeks after the end of your service? When you came home?
Just look for a job, I guess.
Did you go back to school at all?
I started to pursue a master's degree in MBA, but then as time progressed, that my career path was such that I said, why am I going to this effort and expense? This is not going to be any benefit to me.
So was, when you did go, was that covered by the GI Bill?
Well, no. Because one thing that I've always enjoyed is playing around with cars, pardon me, hot rods and things like that. So I'm thinking to myself that I know what I'll do. I'll go to auto body repair school under the GI Bill, and then learn how to do all these various things on cars, and then if I decide to build a hot rod or anything, I'll be able to do it myself.
So that was what that went through?
My GI Bill? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you make any close friendships while in the service?
I maybe thought so at the time, but I don't think so now because of the fact that I haven't seen any or heard from any of the guys in years and years.
Well, you know that the
Oh,
Gagan,
okay, this is another thing.
So,
Although, you know, one thing occurs to me that you just brought back to mind. When we were at Fort Carson, Colorado, preparing to deploy to Vietnam with the 5th Mechanized Infantry Division, that we were drawing all our troops and equipment and everything, getting everything all marshaled up to go. And one critical vacancy that we didn't have filled was a signal equipment repairman. In other words, a guy who can fix telephones and radios and various types of things. Without communications equipment, you can't really communicate much further than the distance you can shout. So I understood the importance of that. And then somehow I learned that there was a guy who was an excellent signal radio repairman in the brig, in the slam at Fort Carson. And so I said to my sergeant, I said, I think we ought to go and pay this guy a visit. And so we received permission to do that. And so his name was Jim Foucault from Waukegan, Illinois. And so we paid him a visit. So Jim, what'd you do that got you in the slam? I said, I went AWOL. Well, that's a silly thing to do. Why'd you go AWOL? He said, well, when I signed up for the Army, that I signed up, and the guarantee was that I'd be sent to school to be trained as a signal equipment repairman, and that I'd be used in that capacity. And what did they do instead? They made me an infantryman and signed me to that. And so I said they didn't hold up their end of the deal, so I'm out of here. And they found me, and here I am. So I said, so you like signal, you would like to be a signal equipment repairman? He said, I know I would. I said, what makes you think so? And he said, well, back home in Illinois, I was a ham radio operator. Well, myself, haven't done ham radio at one time myself. I said, now this is interesting. Tell me about your ham radio experience. And so he said, well, I'm an amateur extra class. And he told me other things, but that means when you knew the various levels of expertise in amateur radio, that is right up here on the top. And so I said, so you got that kind of experience? He says, beside that, I had my own shop at home that I earned income by repairing things for people. So I said, well, it seems pretty silly that the Army wouldn't have used you in that capacity since you got all that previous training and experience. He said, well, that's the way I saw it too. It just didn't work out that way. So I said, well, Jim, let me ask you this. I need a signal equipment maintenance guy. If I can get you out of here, what kind of assurances can you give me that you wouldn't go AWOL again? He said, I don't know what I can tell you. He said, I was willing to join the service. All I ever wanted to be was a communications equipment repairman. And if you got a vacancy that you can use me in, I can only tell you that I will be the best communication equipment repairman that you've ever seen. I said, well, okay, I'm holding you to that. We got him out. We got him in our unit in Vietnam. He was a lifesaver on so many occasions I can't even account. And we'd get some equipment damaged, and Jim, we'd go down to the trash dump and scrounge up other equipment that had been blown up. Jim would take off 4, 5, 6 different things and make one good set out of all this junk. And whereas if we tried to get it done through normal channels, it would have taken days or weeks. And so this was impressive. Well, Jim did such a fantastic job and saved my butt so many times when I would have been out of communications otherwise, that when it was all said and done, I recommended Jim for a Bronze Star for meritorious achievement. and which he eventually got. And of all the awards and decorations that I ever put anybody in for, Jim Foucault is the only one who ever said thank you. He was home in Waukegan at the time, and he was telling me about how that he was back in the same shop that he'd been operating before he entered the Army. And I don't know if I still have it, but he wrote this really nice letter, and he said, thanks for giving me a chance. So that's all I wanted to do. Said I wanted to do my job. That's all I wanted to do, was something that I know I'm good at and where I knew I could make a contribution. And I really appreciate what you did. Well, I appreciate what Jim did. Out of all the people, he's the only one that ever bothered to contact me and said thanks.
Okay. Did you join any veterans organizations?
All of them.
All of them.
Oh no, I beg your pardon. Didn't join the American Legion. VFW, DAV, Military Order of the Purple Heart, 101st Airborne Division Association. There must be others.
How active are you in that?
Not at all. I'd love to be active, except for the fact that down at the, what do they call it, a post house, that it seems like all they do is drink, smoke, and play cards, and I don't do any of those.
What did you go on to do as a career after the war?
I had 7.5 years invested at the time my career ended, and I thought to myself, gee, I don't want to waste that. Long story short, I ended up in the Postal Service and retired from that 3 years ago with a total of nearly 45 total years.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Yeah, it did. I know you want me to continue.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wish the politicians would keep out of it. The majority of them don't have a clue what wars are about. If you want to be a politician that just pretend you know everything about everything, and you probably will get elected, but that doesn't say that you're an expert. If we could be committed to a particular war or action and not have the politicians trying to meddle in things they don't have a clue about, then we could do things more efficiently, more quickly, and with fewer casualties. And if I sounded very harsh and sharp about that, it's only because I am. I experienced it firsthand in Vietnam, and I've been seeing it time and time again in the news ever since then.
Have you attended any reunions?
Of a military unit? I have not.
How did your service and experiences affect your life?
I think that I'm a little more compassionate on somebody who might have got wounded in action. And I think I'm a little more compassionate on somebody who might be living in a country ruled by a dictator or some kind of charlatan, and who can't do anything about it by his or herself, and who needs us to help. I have absolutely no problem whatsoever with the U.S. or any other allied nation helping out a country who's being run by a dictatorial figure. By that, I don't mean helping out the dictator. I mean helping to combat him, if not to take him out, such as we did with Saddam, or more recently with bin Laden. Sure.
Can you talk about Korea and your experiences there?
Yeah, well, on this Brianna that I was not there during the actual war, but twice subsequently, as folks don't seem to know, that the war never has been over, that an uneasy armistice was declared at Panmunjom in 1953, and there is firing going on across the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, between North and South Korea to this day. I've heard of people being killed. That war could erupt again at any time.
So what did you do when you were there?
Okay, I did various things. The first time that I was with a logistical organization, and so I was engaged in various logistical types of supply, maintenance, transportation. The second time was really good because I was right in Seoul, the capital of Korea, with the Korea Military Advisory Group, which subsequently became, while I was there, the Joint U.S. Military Advisory Group, Korea, JUSMAG-K. And during that was a wonderful experience because myself and my fellow officers had the job of advising higher level Korean officers, colonels, generals, admirals, and so on, in various aspects of where, if we had some knowledge or experience that we could help them with, then that was our job. And it was very well received. Now here I was a captain at the time, making recommendations to colonels and generals, which sounds a little bit out of sorts, but my expertise lying in different areas than theirs, then they were very grateful for that.
Do any particular experiences stick out from Korea? Any either humorous or frightening or anything?
Sure. Now I had played 3 years varsity soccer, and then while in Korea, that there are still some United Nations command forces there, although they're just a skeleton force as compared to back in the war. And there's Turks and Thais and Brits, and I don't know who all there. Well, I established a rapport with the Brits, and we just had a great time playing soccer, which of course they call football. And we josh and razz each other about our different idioms and modes of speech. But we had a great time, and we played some very high-level soccer, in fact, against other teams from around Korea. So now, of course, the Brits' Jeep is called a Land Rover, which they call a Land Rover, and so we went over to the football pitch, which is what they call a soccer field, for a game, and they arrived in their Land Rover. And don't you know that when they parked, a parking light on the front of the Land Rover was right up against a fence and didn't shatter, and that impressed me. And I said to one of the Brits whom I knew especially well, "Wow," I said, "look at this, you got push the parking light right up against the fence, and it didn't even break." And he says, "Of course, British, you know."
Okay. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to add?
Yeah. I really wanted to do a 30-year service career, but my injuries kept me from it. And as a Christian, I'm supposed to be forgiving, but I have to admit that Viet Cong who injured me that day, whoever he might have been, has never been forgiven by me to this day, and that's over 40 years later.
That is tough. All right, all of that said, I would like to thank you for your service and for your time today given to the center.
The pleasure is mine, and I thank you for the opportunity. Let's do it again sometime.